Lovely to see you all. Thank you for coming. My name is Don Wildman, as I say, and I'm presenting this evening. Uh, as a member of a nearby Quaker meeting, can I just have a show of hands? And I expect to see one. Any Quakers in the audience tonight? Oh, there you go. We are heavily populated. Four. Well, that's very helpful. But tonight is really about how Quakerism took hold, as the title card suggests, here in Westchester County, which is a really big surprise, was to me, first of all. Um, it goes all the way back. I'm a member of Croton Valley Meeting. There is another of us here tonight, which is 13 minutes away down Quaker Road. Take a right on Seven Bridges, take another right on Crow Hill, and you're on your way over there. Croton Valley Meeting was a preparative meeting. It was started out of Chappaqua Meeting. So I'm here as sort of a down hundreds of years later as a descendant of your meeting place. So we'll be talking about all of that tonight. This is the brochure that I gave out. That's for Croton Valley Meeting. I invite you, I'll do it at the top and the bottom of this talk, to come and pay us a visit. You'll be very familiar with what all this is about as we go. I'll be speaking, I hope, for about 30 to 35 minutes tonight, generally on the subject of Quaker settlement in Westchester County over the course of the 18th and 19th centuries. But it really begins in the 17th century. It's a subject surprisingly near to and dear to me as a resident of Westchester County. My wife, Melissa, and I moved here in 2015. I was born and raised in the greater Philadelphia area, which is, very common. Everybody's Quaker down there in Philadelphia. But it was a surprise to me as I drove around in those early days how many Quaker roads and Quaker bridges and Quaker this and that's were in this Westchester area. It was really a genuine surprise, and I didn't know why. And so years went by, and I finally decided to figure it out. This is what you're seeing. This is the result of that curiosity of mine. How did the Quakers come to land in Philadelphia? I mean, in Westchester, when Philadelphia is usually the big story. Pennsylvania, that's William Penn. It's a very, very specific and very meaningful story that you're about to hear over the next half an hour. All right. So we moved here. I found it curious that so much of the area had such Quaker identity, and it left me wanting to know more. American Quakerism, which had so much to do with the creation and moral development of New York, of the United States of America, finds its earliest origins right here in Westchester County. This is where it first started, believe it or not. Right here in this county, in this town, in fact, in these surrounding communities where Quakerism really found purchase. Did you get that pun? Okay, good. U.S. Quaker, this is the fact of the evening to know about. There you go. American, blah, blah, blah. That's a statement that will be modified in a moment, but it's true, and it's the basic message of this evening. Now, when I found out, it changed my whole perception of this county, to be clear. I was born a Quaker. They call me a birthright Quaker. Means I was born into it, not my choice. My parents were Quakers, and I go all the way back. I went to meeting in childhood. As a teen, I attended a Quaker boarding school, a Quaker college, and I'm still practicing as an adult Quaker. There were a lot of lapse years in there, believe it or not, 20 years or so. I was wandering around not knowing what I was, but here I am back in my 50s, now in my 60s, to find out that U.S. Quakerism started here in New York. This is a big history and a long timeline, so I'm going to try to keep things simple tonight. Everything I'm discussing comes from secondary sources, historical societies, libraries. You can read about it all online. I'm not, breaking ground here. The point of this really is you may share the same curiosity and delight that I had when I discovered these things. Exact dates are wiggly. History can be a game of telephone. So as we go, I'm going to avoid specific dates and too many names and try to stick to the broad strokes. That is Croton Valley Meeting House. Anybody seen it? Isn't that incredible? It is literally 13 minutes. Yeah, this is literally 13 minutes from where you sit right now. And it's been there since 1902. It's located at 210 Meeting House Road in the neighborhood of Stanwood here in Newcastle. As I say, you take that route that I just told you about down Quaker Road, fittingly. Seven Bridges Road, which really has 7 bridges. I counted them today as I was going. Then 3 more turns and you find yourself in this town. you find yourself in Stanwood, which is right across the way, which is named, who knew James Wood? You knew, Margot, you knew James Wood. Stanwood is the neighborhood of this. Stanley Wood was the Wood who developed that neighborhood. The Wood family was very integral to everything that we're talking about tonight. We'll be coming back to this building at the conclusion of this talk. So here's a brief explanation, and this is something just to keep in mind as we go, how a Quaker meeting house begins. It was today, sadly, there aren't that many new Quaker meetings happening, but there was a period of time, especially in the 1800s, as we'll discuss in a moment, when there were a lot of them being started. And I mean, imagine when all the land around here, of course, was farmland and grazing land, and a small group of like-minded Quaker farmers who'd made their way up here, as we will discuss, decide to create their own meeting. This would be called a preparative meeting, okay? A preparative meeting operated under the guidance and care of an established monthly meeting nearby. In this case, Croton Valley began under Chappaqua, so they were a preparative meeting of Chappaqua monthly meeting, which already existed. Likely the members forming this new preparative meeting would have attended the monthly meeting before, and now they wanted something closer to home, it being the horse and buggy days. The monthly meetings, in turn, operated under a quarterly meeting, and the quarter operates under the umbrella of a yearly meeting. So this is a structure that still works today. It's a tiered system, still in place, and it organizes everything. It was started really by a guy named George Fox, who we'll discuss also in a moment. It sounds more complicated than it is, but it simply concerns the schedule of business meetings that each conducts. Monthly meetings conduct their business meetings monthly, quarterly, and yearly. And then they all get together in these general conferences where they eat hot dogs and drink sodas and things. It's wild in the summer times. But it's all because of the agrarian life that all these people were really living, these Quaker farmers. They could do it around their harvests and all that sort of thing. So in 1804, probably 1802 or 3, Croton Valley Friends would have come into existence as a preparative meeting under Chappaqua Monthly, here in the Purchase Quarter, which was under the New York Yearly Meeting with all the other quarters throughout the state. So there you have the meeting house system, and let's look at how it took hold here in Westchester County and beyond. A gradual story that unfolds over several generations of Quakers methodically expanding their holdings, creating new meeting houses and new communities, and all the while spreading their values throughout the county and the state. It works out really well for the Quakers here in New York. Take a look at this. This is where I need to go mobile. All right, so this is a really cool map. This actually exists this hangs in the original, it's about this big. It's a tiny little map, and it hangs in the lobby of Croton Valley Meeting. And as you see, map of the meetings, constituting, what is that, constituting? New York Yearly Meeting of Friends by this guy in 1821, and the original map is there. Look at all of these different marks up the Hudson Valley, as you see these, and then all the way across to Buffalo. Dozens and dozens, if not, tens of these things are going on. And as you're looking closer, that's the map. Every one of these little marks is either a preparative meeting, monthly, quarterly, all along, and they're all marked up. Here's us right there. That's Chappaqua right there, and then Croton Valley, Amawalk, Peekskill, Poughkeepsie, all the way up, and then all the way across. By 1821, there were already, I think there's something like 1,200 or something like that. I forget. I should have that number, but that's just New York. I mean, now add to that Pennsylvania and Massachusetts, and there are just Quaker meetings everywhere in America at that point. Every one of those faint marks is another Quaker meeting house, hundreds of them across the state by 1821, a diaspora that continues through the 19th century, from the antebellum period into the Civil War to the Gilded Age and the Progressive era. Through all these decades of development of New York State, the Quakers are present and playing a major role. I've never seen anything that really makes that as clear as that map does. We all talk about them in abolitions. It's all, everybody has a kind of, a very simple understanding of what the Quakers were a part of. But when you see the numbers, you get the idea. Now, I said American Quakerism starts here in Westchester County, and I should qualify. that spark becomes a flame that is actually lit across the Sound in Long Island. And before that, there were the Boston Martyrs. We'll get to them. And of course, before all this, the Dutch. And the same time in England, the 1640s, there's this guy I mentioned before, George Fox. This is just the European side of the story because, of course, for hundreds of years, if not more than 1,000, the entire realm was occupied and had been settled by the indigenous peoples who were there, thriving on the amazing resources available. In fact, we should pay that some attention. This is the bottom is Manhattan right here, Manhattan it's called. This is an early map of the New Netherlands from this time, and that's how many different indigenous tribes there are. The Pequots, you recognize that up there, the Mohicans right here up the Hudson River, which is called the North River by the Dutch. This is the Delaware River here, leading up to the Senecas. All these familiar names from New York history were actually derived from those original names. But that's how many different kinds of places. This is the Verrazano Straits right there, Sandy Point or Sandy Hook. It's right that place. So these guys were all over the place here. The Lenape, of course, with the big name, aka the Delaware Nation, stretching all along the mid-Atlantic coast and upriver, which was called the Mahakanak by these people, or the river that flows both ways, aware of its tidal estuary nature. These were Munsee Lenape, the Wappinger, Mohican, the Haudenosaunee. That's good. Haudenosaunee, all living and fishing and farming, utilizing the valley. And the story of how they were moved off these lands, either by force or negotiation, is similar to so much that happened across the continent. Questionable real estate purchases, land seizures, disease, subjugation, finally exile, and near extinction of whole groups. Unpleasant and difficult, and I'd recommend this book to understand it better. Great book, Island at the Center of the World, Russell Shorter. He just came out with a new book in 2025, which I'm yet to read, but I got it yesterday. So that's just important to keep in mind that that's, of course, the backdrop of all of America at this time. But tonight we're focusing on the Quakers, who can be, fortunately, counted among the somewhat good people in the terms of how they dealt with indigenous folks. Especially William Penn is very famous for having not broken treaties, and agreed to certain limitations on development and so forth. He had a pretty good reputation. Up here, similar story. The Quakers are pretty good about respecting deeds and things like that, that which were gone back on by so many people in the early America times. Nonetheless, we are talking about colonization whenever we're talking about these kinds of things. And in colonization, people get exploited one way or another, simple fact. Someone loses, someone wins, no matter by whose hand. So keep this in mind as we pursue the generally peaceful story of Quakerism. The story of this man, George Fox. So here's the guy I was talking about. George Fox, an Englishman, lived from 1624 to 1691, died at the age of 67. Born in the Midlands of England, he was a very serious young man. Intense would be the fitting word. We're at the tail end of the Protestant Reformation when he's born, which started with Martin Luther in Germany, and then Henry VIII and the Church of England, all spawning the Puritan movements. If George Fox had been born 100 years earlier, he'd probably have been a bishop in the Church of England, or maybe a cardinal for the Catholics, and left it at that. But this was the 1600s, and England was in a powder keg of civil strife and religious turmoil, with civil wars being fought between royalists and parliamentarians. The rise of individualism in English society was taking place. The printing press had been around for about 150 years at that point, and pamphlets were being published, and boy, do Quakers like pamphlets. So all that's the backdrop for a visionary quest upon which George Fox embarks as a young man. Mid-20s we're talking about. He's promoting a revolutionary notion that has been in the air for a while now. He's not alone in this. There are many who are talking about this. It's a new kind of Christian thinking that's controversial, to say the least. It basically cuts out the middleman between Christians and their God, removing the obstacles of religious clergy. It asks the question, what if all the priests, bishops, ministers, deacons, everybody, the whole organizational infrastructure of religion was simply gone? What if Christ was worshipped in your own way, allowing for the Holy Spirit to enter into you in utter silence? Very strange idea. but it would be the ultimate individualistic egalitarian faith, in a sense, the furthest evolution of Protestantism. No matter who you are, or where you come from, or who's your family, or how much money you have, if you are seeking a connection to the divine, you can find it in the simplest fashion by sitting in a room alone or with others in silent worship. That's what George Fox was proposing. Pretty astonishing idea. Very Eastern, actually, when you think about it. But it was really about purifying English Christianity of its political corruption that was going on at the time. And that made very many people exceedingly uncomfortable, needless to say. Fox had been preaching this new philosophy and practice for a few years up north in Lancashire, when he, in 1649, same year Charles I was executed and the Puritan Revolution is in full swing, the rise of Cromwell and all this. This is when this 25-year-old is first jailed under the charge of apostasy of the Church of England. His movement up north is called the Society of Friends, later derisively nicknamed the Quakers, because they quaked with religious fervor. And like I say, there are other groups confronting this church corruption in their own way. The Levelers, the Diggers, the Fifth Monarchy. The Fifth Monarchy men were all groups promoting some kind of individualistic pursuit. But it was George Fox and the men and women, especially the women, who he brought along with him, who forged Quakerism into a movement that would stand the test of time. Fox began preaching in 1647. By 1660, some 15 years later, there were 35 to 50,000 Quakers in England. He had struck a resonant chord. At this point, colonization is going on across the Atlantic and has been for a few centuries. The Spanish, the Portuguese, the English at Jamestown since 1607. Pilgrims in New England came in 1620. Roger Williams in Providence, Rhode Island. The Quakers won't be influential or numerous enough to have their own colony until the 1680s. That's William Penn in Pennsylvania. But in these decades prior to 1680, a handful of Quaker missionaries head to Massachusetts Bay Colony to try and convert native souls. So understand, these guys are doing their thing over in England, getting a lot of trouble for it, being thrown in jail and so forth. So they want to get out of town, and they think, oh, in this new world where everybody's starting these new religious colonies, let's go over there and be missionaries. It'll be great. We'll find new Quakers. Unfortunately, what they find in Massachusetts Bay Colony is a lot of resistance. They are not welcome at all, at least by the Puritan leadership. They are imprisoned, they're chased out of town, an anti-Quaker law is passed. If you possessed a Quaker book, you'd be fined £5, when £5 could really buy you something. So these folks are called by us today the Boston Martyrs. Eventually in Boston in 1659 and 60, two different occasions, 4 of these missionary Quakers, 2 men and 2 women, are hung. Today we call them the Boston Martyrs for that reason. And when word of these horrors reached England, it inspires one man, a Yorkshire mariner named Robert Fowler, to build a ship he proclaims in the cause of truth. This is all brand new. I'm 64 years old. I was just learning this year. It's amazing after a life of Quakerism. He builds this small coastal vessel. He christens it the Woodhouse. And this ship is entirely inadequate for transoceanic passage. But nonetheless, Fowler perseveres, and supported by contributions from friends around England, he builds this thing. Understand, this was really not meant for going. He was a coastal mariner. He did fishing and stuff on the coast of Yorkshire. He builds this. This becomes basically the Mayflower of Quakerism. But you could even call it a Noah's Ark. It's that kind of purpose for him. And this is a big voyage for us. The Mayflower of Quakerism, Noah's Ark, even without a compass, knowing little of latitude and longitude, Fowler and the rest embark in mid-April. He had 11 passengers, that's all. 1657, mid-April, and by some miracle, they sight land in late May 1657. 7 weeks, they make it across the Atlantic, and they lose no one. A voyage which normally took months. Fortunately, they hadn't sighted Massachusetts. It was Long Island, and on June 1st, 1657, the ship landed in New Amsterdam. And some of the passengers disembarked and headed south to Maryland and Virginia, where they knew they could find Englishmen. Others headed for Providence. Only 5 of the 11 stayed in New Amsterdam to preach in the streets of that city, much to the dismay and consternation of the Dutch authorities, in particular, Peter Stuyvesant, who now had these notoriously problematic people planted on his shores, and he wasn't glad for it. 2 of the 5 end up in Rhode Island in Providence. The other 3 land in a Long Island village where English Calvinists and others had been settling throughout this period. So that's a little confusing. I just want to make it clear. It's a Dutch colony, but the Dutch were open to English coming. They didn't mind. Go start your village out there in Long Island. Just pay your taxes. The Dutch were like that. They were all about the money. So a small port was called Vlissingen. That's my bad Dutch. Here we go again. Vlissingen. And that is named for its namesake city back in Holland, an important harbor which had been anglicized by the British for a very long time before that, called Flushing. Okay? And it is in Flushing, here in New Netherland, where these Quakers have their first meeting in a private home of a man named John Bone. The house still stands. That is the house you can visit, actually. It's right nearby the Flushing meeting. By this time in 1657, there were some 10 villages out on Long Island and a bunch of English settlers living among those Dutch, all welcome to live and work and pay taxes. There was a strict but fair system of governance with town meetings and such, and the right to petition the government. While power was held by the provincial government, led by Peter Stuyvesant, Dutch governance allowed for argument and protest, the right to petition. This is the man we're talking about, Peter Stuyvesant. Quite a guy. If anybody's read that Island of the Center of the World, he's an amazing story. I mean, he's an incredible person. Stuyvesant was a member of the Dutch Reformed Church in New Amsterdam and did not approve of the Quaker incursion and took action in the months after their arrival to control its spread. He issued an edict of his own that forbade anyone in the colony from allowing a Quaker meeting to take place or even house a Quaker under penalty of fine. Unlike the Puritans up in Boston, he wasn't threatening to execute anyone, but it was still an extreme measure. But in the winter, someone named Henry Townsend decided to test this law by holding a Quaker meeting in his home, or by holding a Quaker meeting. Townsend was fined and banished from the colony, triggering a petition among the Flushing citizens, Quaker and otherwise. It was called a remonstrance, the Flushing Remonstrance, dated December 27th, 1657, and signed by 31 people, including the town clerk and the sheriff. Now, if you leave here tonight with one learned piece of information, it is how important the Flushing Remonstrance is. They even made a stamp about it. The Flushing Remonstrance of 1657 is one of the key documents of American history, right up there with the big ones. It is considered one of the fundamental building blocks of the United States Constitution, specifically the First and 14th Amendments, the right to freedom of religion, and that there shall be no such thing as a state religion, not on the federal or state level. The Flushing Remonstrance was the first time average citizens demanded this right and got it. And it stuck. It was never forgotten. James Madison, the architect of the U.S. Constitution, would be well versed in the meaning and implications of the Flushing case. He even authored a famous argument in the Virginia House of Delegates in 1785 on the subject of religious freedom, entitled Memorial and Remonstrance Against Religious Assessments. Likely no coincidence that he used that word in the title. That's the Flushing Remonstrance. It still exists. I believe it's in the New York State Archives. The way this worked, Stuyvesant wasn't happy about this remonstrance. He wasn't going to, change his mind just because a bunch of people signed a petition to it. That petition made its way back to Holland. It was the Dutch East India Company that looked at this and said, "What's the big deal? We just want to make money here. Why are we getting all cultural about this? Let them do whatever they want with their religion. It's not that bad." There were Quakers in Holland. That's where the Pilgrims were there before them, and all that sort of thing was happening. So it was the corporate chiefs who then sent word back to Stuyvesant to let it go, let it be. And that was the win that created the freedom of religion in New York. Look how popular this is. I mean, I couldn't believe that. I didn't know that this is so important that there was cartoons. There was cartoons done about it. It really percolated right through the culture, and somehow we, as a generationally, we've just lost this whole piece. Most people have lost the importance of the Flushing Remonstrance. That sheriff and the town clerk got tossed into jail by Peter Stuyvesant. But in 1663, officials, as I say, with the Dutch West India Company back in Amsterdam, tell Stuyvesant to back off. They write, quote, "The consciences of men at least ought to ever remain free and unshackled," unquote. Very elegant language from a corporate chief. Of course, their consciences were completely unbothered by the slavery that they were undertaking, practiced in New Netherland at the time, but that's for another talk. As far as the Quakers go, let them do what they want. Along comes 1664. The Dutch were only here for 40 years. Am I right? Yeah, something like that. 1624, officially the colony begins. 1664, it becomes English. The English take over New Netherland and rename it New York. And a new Quaker meeting house subsequently is built in 1694 in Flushing, and 331 years later, it still stands. There it is, the Flushing Meeting House, which, if anyone hasn't seen it, is a wonderful place to visit. Amazing place. They got a great museum in the lobby, and it really tells the story. It is, in fact, the oldest house of worship in New York and the second oldest meeting house in America. The first oldest is up in Massachusetts. So that's where things get planted. That's where that spark starts, as I tell you. So we're about to get to the meat of the matter here, how Quakers came to Westchester County and began the settlements that became the towns many of us live in today, all those street names and such. In preparing for this talk, I took a map of Westchester County and I attached a tag to every site that had anything to do with Quakerism that was important to this talk. And that's how many sites there are and how many dates there are in Westchester County that pertain to this. It's a lot. A lot happened over a 200-year period, and those tags aren't even about the Revolution or the Civil War or abolition or suffrage or prison reform. All those tags are later on. This is just the developmental period before all those other meetings happen throughout the state of New York. Everything that happens in Westchester gets that started. I mentioned secondary sources. Much of what I'm about to explain comes out of an 1886 book, a 2-volume Westchester history called The History of Westchester County, written and published in 1886 by J. Thomas Scharf. It was given to me by the Westchester County Archives man, the head of it. And it was this great big book with this dense text that really describes every single town in Westchester and how they begin. It's really neat, very meticulous detail. And then along with that, we have the online material, creating a timeline. Generally, what you're looking up there is the bottom half of all those tags have to do with the late 1600s into the 1700s, the upper half after the Revolution and into the 1800s. So it's sort of a part one and part two. In the late 1600s, 1695 to be exact, the English have been in power for 30 years at this point. And a man named John Harrison represents the interests of a group of investors. One Quaker among them, Samuel Haight, and he's from Flushing Friends. So Harrison comes to the easternmost area of the county between present-day Rye and Mamaroneck. Here, let's focus in here, I think. Yeah, you see how that... Yeah, all these... This is a little bit later. Remember, this comes later on, but it's just to give you a sense of where these places are. So Harrison comes to... acquire land from a man who was of Native American descent, who claimed to own the land. That's up for question. But according to Scharf, however, this had been lands previously purchased by other settlers and left undeveloped. So Harrison disregards those entanglements and only deals with this singular man. The story, likely apocryphal, but it's a good one, is that in order to decide on the property lines, because this is Native American land and they don't think in terms of property lines, that man, the seller, told Harrison to get on his horse, and whatever he could ride to in one day on his horse would be the property that he would then acquire. Unfortunately, John Harrison's horse was afraid of water, and so it avoids all streams, ponds, and lakes in creating the town of Harrison. So you see how weird it is. That's the story of why it looks that way. So Harrison's Purchase will become Purchase New York as they get divided later on. That becomes known as Harrison's Purchase in 1695. Over time, some investors were bought out, others left. Even Harrison leaves the deal, but Samuel Haight stayed on, and maybe that was the plan all along. Harrison's Purchase becomes the land available for Quaker settlement, for new generations, for younger people from that Flushing community to move up into Westchester County. It takes about 20 years for things to ramp up. Everything moves generationally in those days. When the meeting house now built in Flushing, that generation of Long Island Quakers stays put, but they would have had their homes and lives settled. But it would be that next generation, those kids who grow up and want to start their own farms and hear the call from across the sound towards the Purchase. They'd have called it they'd have called that along the way. And some of them create the first meeting house in the area of the Bronx. It's called Westchester Square today. Back then, there was, of course, no Bronx. It was called Westchester down below. It was the village of Westchester. And a meeting house was built there on Xenia Avenue. That is gone. It burned down. But there's a Friends burial site in an Episcopal church there that proves they were there. And that's the cemetery that's in Westchester Square in the Bronx. And when you start poking around, and this is really what I did back in January, I went to that place and I looked for closer, and sure enough, there's that marker, Friends Burial. So that's the burial ground for the first meeting house ever started in Westchester County back then, which is now the Bronx. Others migrate farther past Mamaroneck River and begin to meet there in the early 1720s. That group is what leads to a new meeting formed in Scarsdale in 1723. In 1724 and onward, serious development begins on the lands within Harrison's Purchase. And this begins the process where meetings are held in homes, and those meetings gather enough members to become preparative, as we discussed, which then becomes a monthly meeting, and a meeting house is built. And that meeting house eventually was Purchase Meeting. Purchase Meeting because it's on the Purchase. They built their meeting house in 1727. Rye Meeting House north of that built in 1739. Mamaroneck Friends built another meeting house nearby there. By 1744, things have gotten serious. Multiple meetings, new meeting houses. They go next level and they create the Purchase Quarter. So now we're really serious. And this is what happens there. That's Chappaqua monthly meeting right up the street. So back in the 1720s, we get to a place where the native population called it Chappaqua. Am I pronouncing that right? Someone can tell me this. Chappaqua? Well, no, I know that's, but the Native American pronunciation was Chappaqua, I believe. It translates as the rustling lands, where the winds blew. This property was in question, located between the contested boundaries of the old manor estates of the Dutch and the English. So a third generation friend from Long Island named Abel Weeks, his great grandmother was one of those 11 that were on the Woodhouse, that ship that came across. He comes to this area and acquires land from Native Americans to begin his farm on the road between Chappaqua and North Castle Corners, now called Mount Kisco. So this is a time when a lot of the settlement is causing the English colonial government to issue new land patents, which lead to the creation of towns, and that becomes the town of Newcastle in 1721, which in turn attracts even more settlers. The Abel Weeks home was used for Friends meetings before a request of Purchase Quarter in 1724 that a new meeting house be built in Chappaqua. This was approved, and in 1752, those involved went to the Mamaroneck monthly meeting for help creating a committee to pursue the matter. And before too long, in 1753, construction began on the Chappaqua Friends Meeting House on the site where we have one today. The building has now gone through many changes, of course, but that's basically what it is. And it sits appropriately on Quaker Road. It's a beautiful building. So I'm going to go fast here and wind things up because there's a lot that happens really quickly over the next few years, creating that density of meeting houses. Scarsdale begins their meeting house 1668. Another structure replaces it in 1828. 1760, the village of Hanover, it will be renamed Yorktown, begins theirs in 1788. This is where the Amawalk Friends meeting is built in 1773. Out of Amawalk comes the Peach Pond meeting. That's in North Salem. In 1791, the Chappaqua Meeting House is expanded to the dimensions we see today. As the 18th century becomes the 19th, friends are north, south, east, and west throughout Westchester County. Meetings are spreading up the Hudson in Poughkeepsie. The Quakers came down from Nantucket and started a new meeting house in Hudson in the 1780s. Albany, Syracuse, Buffalo, it is happening everywhere. Much of this is due to what's called the Second Great Awakening, which is this whole period of American history that's going on throughout the 1800s, this great revivalism that's happening in Christianity, which is a reaction to the industrialization that's happening. And that's a whole nother conversation. But the reason there's so much religious fervor in this country is because of that period. People are looking for something. I live in the summer times up in Martha's Vineyard with my wife, and we live in that community in Oak Bluffs, which is a very much a camp meeting town. And all of those camp meeting towns are part of that Second Great Awakening. All of that big time religion that's happening up and down the East Coast is part of that movement. And the Quakers are no exception to the rule. That's why so much interest in this. Oh, that's Amawalk, also a fantastic meeting house that you really should see. It also has a very famous fact that Robert Capa, the very famous photographer who died in the Vietnam War, but took all those famous Spanish Revolution War pictures, he died and he had become close to Quakers in his career, and he wanted to be buried in a Quaker cemetery. So he's buried here along with his brother and his mother. It's the Capa Cemetery now. People come to see it. So 1804, we come back to where we began. The Croton Valley Friends meeting is formed. They meet in homes, as we've discussed. First, then applying to create their own meeting, which is built right where the first Croton Dam reservoir was. Bad luck. 1842, that dam is created, and the reservoir will take over that land. So they have to move. They're bought out by New York City, and they build another Quaker meeting house not that far away. But that will be forced out by the second reservoir that comes from the new Croton Dam. But finally, in 1902, the present Croton Valley meeting is opened where it stands and operates today. So interesting trivia. Our meeting house, unusual in appearance, very non-Quaker, was designed by a Chappaqua architect named Alfred Tiny Bussell, who also designed the original Chappaqua Public Library. Could I draw this circle any more complete? He did both in the style known as the collegiate Gothic, so prevalent on college campuses back in the day. So we are small, but we are mighty, and we are welcoming membership, and we meet every Sunday at 11 a.m., as friends have always done. For anyone to come, all are welcome. That's the inside. Take a look. Look close. Hold on, Joe. That's the meeting room, and that was the wedding that we had in December, which was just beautiful. And there's another floor down below, which we're working on refurbishing right now. But it's a beautiful little room. So it's a nice place to visit. So come on in sometime. Come to Croton Valley. Thank you very much. Yeah, yes. Yeah, I mean, yeah, is there tithing? How do Quakers support themselves, basically? Yeah, there's donations requested. Generally, it will be decided upon how big the membership is, what the budget is, and all that sort of thing. But yeah, that's generally how it works. But Quaker meeting houses also rent themselves out, create cash stream, that. So the advantage Quakers have is we've been around for a long time, so the bills are already paid on a lot of stuff. We have a roof on this place, so we have the investment portfolio that we have. Yes. Sunday school. How are Quakers trained, and how do we educate our young in the religion and in religion in general? We all go to Sunday schools. Generally, when you're a little tiny kid, you're not going to sit through an hour of silence very well. So they create Sunday schools, and for 45 minutes every Sunday, you're in Sunday school. The last 15 minutes, all the little kids come in and join their parents and sit down and make it through 15 minutes of silence. That's generally how the first 8 years of your life go, maybe more. and then sooner or later you're sort of brought into the fold, and you become, stick around for a lot longer. Yes. First day schools, yeah. A lot of schools, a lot of meetings have their own schools attached. The Quakers, if they've done anything big time in life, they created an education system that to beat the band. I mean, the Quaker colleges are top notch. All to a boarding school called Town outside of Philadelphia. Philly thing. These educational places. The Quakers are all over education, and it starts in elementary school in many places. Yes. Christian. It's I would say it's a New Testament Christian religion. It's not more complicated than that, because it's Jesus's teachings, it's the Sermon on the Mount, it's all of that stuff. There's no hoobly goobly stuff going on here. It's straight Bible stuff, and that's what we learned in Sunday school. And in the old days, very strict Bible stuff. There's also, way too much for this conversation, but there's all kinds of sects of Quakerism as well. You go out west, and there's the Reformed Quaker Church, not meeting, because they use a preacher. When you get to Indiana and beyond, and where Quaker meetings on the East Coast are struggling to keep membership, those Quaker meetings are going like gangbusters out there. Western Quakerism is a much, much more popular Quakerism than Eastern Quakerism. Yes, the meeting room. Yeah, that's the meeting room. They are very simple. There's nothing in Quaker meeting intentionally unadorned. Why does that? What's the catchphrase of that? Yeah, simplicity is one of the tenets of Quakerism, and was under George Fox. This is, yeah, like the Shakers. It's related in some way to that. No idolatry of any sort. You won't even see a cross in a Quaker meeting. Nothing on the walls at all, in fact, and that's by intention. It's a deliberate idea that you should be alone in this simple space with the Holy Spirit. Yes. Another tenet of Quakerism is pacifism. So how did we know how? Sorry. Yeah. Okay. So pacifism. So how are the Quakers known for pacifism, and by association, conscientious objection, and all protests against war? You go back to the beginning for all of this, because they saw war and as an evil, of a human evil, not an act of God. It was they began looking at human lives, and how do we serve God by not dedicating ourselves to these corrupt ways of human beings. War, for all its obvious reasons, violates so much about Christianity. And so love thy neighbor, anything you want to talk about with that sort of thing, what came from those early days of Quakerism. They became very activist. This is where this is going to, by the way. When I said that this speech is a tip of an iceberg, I'm fascinated by the progressive era of New York. What happens across New York in the 1800s into the 1900s, Teddy Roosevelt and all that, is heavily influenced by Quakerism because of their presence all the way across New York. And it happens here, which is so interesting to me, as Russell Shorto will say, because it's all rooted in the Dutch colonial time. That's why the New York culture is so unique, so different than Pennsylvania or Massachusetts. Massachusetts has its own thing with the Puritans. It's a very unique culture up there because it's rooted in Puritanism. Here it's Dutch and Quakerism. It's a fascinating combination. Yes.
The role of Quakers in the Underground Railway, particularly in this part of Westchester. As I understand, the Underground Railway actually people passed from house to house.
Yeah.
Right up to Chappaqua.
Yeah, I'm not an expert on this at all, but I know from television shows that I've done, New York was a lot busier in this regard than people understand it to be today. New York City was a hotbed of this stuff, particularly in Brooklyn, with who's the famous author? Uncle Tom's Cabin, Harry Beecher. So her brother or somebody relative of hers, yeah, was a big time abolitionist and had a lot to do with that. So we were above that. So of course it was on, it was part of the whole railway system, I guess you call it. Sure. Well, just like war and simplicity, anti-slavery was a big part of Quakerism. It's a fascinating. Thank you for the question. I don't have a good answer for you. I can tell you the Underground Railroad is one of those many historical facts of American life that people don't realize how people up in Massachusetts. I mean, there were a lot of good people doing that kind of stuff. But the Quakers had a lot to do with it. The magic of Quakers, for my money, is in the 19th century, they get very savvy with politics and business. They're very successful as a you know, in American culture. And they struggle with that themselves, and it leads to a schism, which is between the Hicksites and the Orthodox, and that's another story early in the 19th century. But that has to do with how do we deal with being in the modern world? How do we deal with buying things and acquiring lands and getting successful? And that became a big problem for Quakers to figure out how to deal with. They dealt with it, and a lot of them became very successful and very politically motivated. And the people who started Croton Valley Meeting were the Wood family. Jim Wood's grandfather, James Wood, was the most famous friend in America when he was alive and well in the late 1800s. He went on to be a big part of the founding of the National Urban League. He was part of NAACP. Rufus Jones, a very famous theologian, hung out at Croton Valley Meeting with him, and they were movers and shakers at that point. No pun intended. Yes, that's Rufus Jones. So yes, well, the American Friends Service Committee began out of World War I. Is that right? Yeah, it was a reaction to World War I and the insanity of World War I. And both European Quakers, remember, this is a big deal over in England at the same time. It's not just an American thing. Everybody was like, if it's World War I, we got to figure out a problem. We got to figure out how to fight this kind of thing and strategize. The American Friends Service Committee came out of a lot of charity that they had done throughout World War I, feeding the German people after the war was over. They end up winning the Nobel Prize in 1947 for all of those efforts. There's the Friends Committee on National Legislation, FCNL, which is a big deal in Congress. All these kinds of things are like, how do we put these tenets that have worked for us personally in our religious lives to work in society so that more people can benefit and we can influence world events in this direction? They were very successful in that regard. Certainly, till the mid 20th century, I'd say. Liberal religion. It embraces pretty much anyone who wants to come in and live by those tenets and support the meeting and do it out of love and respect and all that sort of thing. So the general phrase is speak to the group. You don't want to make a speech for yourself. You have, generally speaking, Quaker meetings are silent for the first half, and then that's when people start to stand up and want to share their ministry. It doesn't happen a lot. It's very discreet. You want to be careful not to sort of dominate things. That being said, there's popcorn meetings, they're called, where people just pop up all the time and want to talk all the time. It happens. But generally speaking, it's about a religious feeling, an impression, something. It could be a piece of poetry, or some people just read right out of the Bible. It can be as simple as that. It's all sorts of things. It's an eclectic thing that comes generally from an understanding, of how this works, which you just learn over time. Yes. Yes. A program? What do you mean? Yes. Every week, Quakers meet. We are at 11 a.m. on Sunday mornings. Some meet at 10 a.m. If you were a real proper Quaker meeting, you'd be meeting on first day. First of all, we don't call them Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, because those were Roman words, right? What's the reason for that, Paul? Yeah, so they call, in the old days, they call them first day, Sunday, first day, second day, third day, just all the way down. So first day is Sunday, and that's when the meetings happen. But then it can also be on third day, which is Wednesdays, a midweek kind of thing. Just go back and try it again. It will naturally be awkward to sit in. That's why I sort of wanted to do a 2-minute meeting for us right here, but I'll try that in some other format. But yeah, it's going to be awkward for somebody who doesn't know. Yeah, that can be generally how it goes. Yeah. Yeah, and it's not for everyone, by the way. You may miss the music and you may miss the hymns, and that's go that direction. This is just another version of the same thing. Yes. Good question. Do they have any problems with the military and I guess the secular world in general? How American life? It's a very forgiving group of people. My father served in World War II. He was a birthright Quaker. His brother was a conscientious objector. So it's a personal decision, and you're not going to be generally ostracized. In the old days, you'd probably be kicked out for various things like marrying a non-Quaker. I mean, there were old school rules that had to be addressed through that schism that I talked to you about. you know, that they basically said, let's join the modern world and let's realize that this is all going on around us. We can't be a secular, you know, we can't be isolated. I think I have to wind up. Thank you very much.